Look Magazine article, contents from June 25th, 1968, Volume 32, Number 13. The National Scene, page 30. The article, Ethel, by Laura Burkheist. Narrated by Janice Brown. This is a story about Ethel Kennedy. For all of her exposure to public gaze at home and abroad, she remains probably the least known Kennedy. With that wry affection, Robert Kennedy once said of his wife of 18 years, "She's a great supporter for her husband. She always thinks I'm right and they're wrong." For weeks, as the family inner circle debated his presidential candidacy, Ethel was 110 for it. All the girls were, she recalled. The male types kept raising last-minute iffy questions, even at breakfast on March 16th, the day he entered the race. Not until she walked off by the car for the Senate caucus room with 9 of her great brood was she sure that the agonizing was over. "That shows you how great Bobby is," says super loyal Ethel. He heard out all the arguments, and then he made up his mind and did what he thought was right. Cajoled by Ethel into playing this Kennedy round of touch football, an ex-Olympic champion admitted, "I feel 180 years old." Just why the Kennedys or their guests didn't collapse on the playing field isn't certain. The wind that day was icy cold. They'd all been up until about 4:30 a.m. in a charitable benefit. If you can breathe, you can play, is the house rule at Hickory Hill. No matter how much pandemonium in the day, each child somehow gets special attention. Ethel Kennedy grew up as Ethel Skakel in a wealthy Dutch-Irish family of 7. She said her life was more helter-skelter than the Kennedys, and once said of Rose Kennedy, "I am delighted that baby Kathleen is to have a new brother or sister, but I will certainly be very jealous if you have more children with brains and prettier in less time than I had, so don't hurry too much with the next." There was Ethel Kennedy, album titled "The Tremendous Lover," dedicated to then Attorney General RFK on his 36th birthday. In one paste-up photo, her husband's head had been superimposed on a ballet dancer's body, floating several feet off the ground. Caption, "What the White House has meant to me." Another is a snap of Ethel with cap and gown, with the Roman Catholic dignity looking on. Caption, "I never would have thought it of the Attorney General unless I heard her confession." There's also a letter from Lemoyne Billings, written before her wedding, a monster gala on the Skakel 45-acre, attended by 1,500 guests. "I am so happy about Bobby Kennedy's choice," wrote Billings. "You particularly were always so giggly about the whole thing. I don't know of anyone I would want to see a Kennedy marry more than you. There is no one, male or female, who will become a part of that rather difficult family so easily." Anyway, as she tells her story, there she was with sister-in-law Joan Kennedy campaigning for JFK in a big Denver stadium when this ghastly thing happened. Joan said to me nonchalantly, "Ethel, what do you say when you get up to speak?" And like a fool, I told her, so she recited my speech verbatim. What a memory that girl has. Gosh, kid, wow. I can't think while sitting down, much less on my feet. It was nightmare material. Predictably, at that point, into the library wandered a child, brown-eyed Pixie Matthew Maxwell Taylor, 3, named for the general. He was spilling something on the well-worn rug. "Are you feeding the rug some lunch, Max?" asked Ethel gently. As reporters on the campaign trail may find, ebullient, gregarious, terribly friendly, Ethel seemed light years the opposite of her regal, distant sister-in-law Jacqueline. But she's shy, nay, balky about some things, like making public speeches or flying in planes, which she does in a state of sheer terror. If RFK is along, she holds his hand while fingering her rosary. Once, when I told her I was flying off to Chicago, she said, amused, "But how can you do it?" "Do what?" "Fly out alone." Lest this seem public, it must be remembered that first her parents, then her favorite brother George, were killed in a freak plane accident. Above all, she shies from self-revelation, which perhaps accounts for the astounding Ethel gap in the Kennedy literature. Her husband explains, "She's reserved and contained in many ways. She doesn't talk much about her feelings or that sort of thing." A sister-in-law who knew her in pre-Kennedy years adds, "She's not introspective. She really doesn't have any complexes or hang-ups. That makes her sound boring, which isn't true. But she lives each day as it comes. She doesn't have to take long walks in the woods or brood like I do. I think she really hates to be alone." She's completely different from Bobby. A great compliment. She keeps him going when he withdraws. That's why she's so good with the kids. She gives each one his inning, his recognition. She is absolutely straight with them. "Goodbye, Bobby. I love you," sings out Ethel as the son exits for school. In comes piano tuner, then furniture man, muttering, "All the antiques should go back to the shop." "The telephone man is here again," announces Secretary Sally Irish, ex-Peace Corps worker in the Philippines. Telephone man, stepping over a huge furry object in the hallway. "What is it, a rug?" "No, only the pony-sized Newfoundland, Brumus, one of the 5 resident dogs, which scale in range from down to tiny, nervous Chihuahua, picked up on an excursion to the Colorado River Basin. Someone could walk in here and stay for 2 days, and we will never know it," says Ethel. "It's like the Caroline, the retired Kennedy family plane. People would board at the airport by mistake or design, look up and say, 'Can that be Jackie Kennedy walking up the aisle in her bare feet?' Somehow, in all of this familial, creative chaos, she has time for everyone, animal or human. 'Have a vet look at Freckles, the spaniel,' she says. 'His back legs look shaky,' or 'change the New York laundry. They're murdering the sheets.' She's not terribly well organized," says a member of Ethel's crowd. "But she has a great sense of priority. Bobby and the kids. Everything else kind of clunks into place." It helps, of course, that old Mom has energy not endeavored by most mortals. Some 11 servants who help with everyday chores, the memory of an elephant, and her maid, her mastermind little red book, an awesome daily listing of things to do. A peek at the log reveals: get new navy girdle, check bath oil and cologne, house guests that weekend include Jim Whittaker, he's the mountain climber, John Glenn, he's the astronaut, and Andy Baby, Ethel's term for Andy Williams. A dinner dance for 100 pals and sparklies, her word for showbiz folk, was pending. Adult lunches at the Calorie Hill, as personnel call it, were staggering. Lamb chops, baked potatoes, rich desserts afloat in chocolate sauce. Ethel, who eats meals with the kids, often in 3 shifts, older, middle, and younger, carries on concerned motherly dialogues. Up barges Christopher to ask conversation-stopping question. Where are your mother and father? In heaven. How did they die? Their little plane crashed into a mountain. When are they going to come back? You'll have to see them there. That's the way it goes. Ethel checks out Bobby Jr., 14, about a school exam. What did they ask? About the Battle of Crecy. When was that? During the 100 Years' War. Okay, you've got me there. Who won? Christopher and Max drag in some length of clothesline. Ethel says, that's a terrific idea. Why don't you tie them together? Tie a basket at the end and haul lollipops up and down the hall. Something nipped at her arm and she yelped. It was only a child, not the sharp-toothed honey bear, a late acquisition of Bobby Jr., the family zoologist, which had broken out of a stout cage in the basement and roamed the house unfound for hours. Ethel darkly. If the honey bear is on the loose again, I don't want to know about it. Last night, when I went to kiss the kids goodnight, I was terrified. Diversionary talk about Bobby Jr. He's not a show-off, but he does know a lot about animals. We asked him to be godfather for the baby, but after thinking it over, he said no. He'd probably be in Africa when Douglas was growing up and couldn't handle the responsibility. The basement, on inspection, was a magnificent clutter. Ski boots by the dozens, hundreds, were piled high on the floor. One wall was lined with ribbons won by Ethel or her daughter Kathleen, 16, in horse shows. A separate family luggage room looked like Grand Central's. The honey bear had incredibly ripped a path right across the ceiling, which dripped dangling wires. Vance Horton, family handyman and zookeeper, finally found him in the toy bin. In a corner perched a fierce, glaring hawk. Bobby Jr. has 2. The more predatory one had recently attacked a huge photo of the senator and also dive-bombed Kerry Kennedy, wearing a fuzzy parka under the illusion she was an animal. Suddenly, I heard a female voice crooning affectionately. Hiya, Carruthers, my fine little friend. It was Geneva, the laundress, sweet-talking a huge tortoise, lugged back from an Africa trip by Bobby Jr. Isn't he adorable? Asked Geneva, who says she wears out an iron every 6 months on the family's laundry. He's a perfect gentleman, the only animal in the house I trust. Somebody's going to hear me talking to Carruthers one day and cart me off in a straitjacket. Upstairs, between 12 and 1, Ethel is bathing and feeding Douglas. I heard that he'd been a premature baby, born with congested lungs, the same ailment that took the life of John Kennedy's son, Patrick. Reluctantly, Ethel talked of the touch-and-go hours when his life wavered in the balance. She'd been set for a skiing expedition with the family to New Hampshire, but in the last minute stayed home with son Joe. He had broken a leg. It was pure luck. She had woken up in a Georgetown hospital where a skilled team of nurses and doctors pulled Douglas through. I'd just as soon not go through that again, she says quietly. Once, in a quixotic moment, I figured she'd been pregnant at least 90 months of her 40 years. To that, add another 9 months, since the 11th young Kennedy is on the way. Ethel Skakel may well have been predestined for the pandemonious life. Sister-in-law Jean Smith, who roamed with her at her stylish, proper Manhattanville College of the Sacred Heart and introduced her to the brother Robert, remembers visiting the Skakel family estate in Greenwich Village. There always seemed to be 16,000 dogs around and huge tables full of people at dinner. She never had many dates or beaux, that I recall. Perhaps because her family had such an enormous fun, she didn't have to go outside. Her father, of Dutch extraction, is prescribed by Robert Kennedy as a tough, moral, self-made man who built and lost 3 fortunes, winding up the tycoon owner of the Great Lakes Carbon Corporation. Ethel, 6th of the family of 7, was her favorite, and she adored him. Her mother, an ex-school teacher of Irish heritage, was apparently a huge and funny woman, much engrossed in civic and charitable causes, and casual about family discipline. Ethel, my family life was more helter-skelter than the Kennedys, so I had to learn. We loved animals and nature, and walked 10 miles at least every Sunday. Like many pious Catholic girls, she wanted to be a nun, and indeed study metaphysics at Columbia University. Yet she also was a lot like her brother George, says an old family friend, talented, good-looking, bright, kind of wild, without any ounce of fear. One college weekend, says Jean Smith, when Ethel had a big upcoming date with Bobby Kennedy, she was confined to school premises, having racked up demerits for coming in late to class. She entreated me to do something about the demerits book, so I flinched it and threw it down the incinerator. The sisters suspected narrowed down to 4, including Jean, but Ethel could honestly say that she wasn't responsible. Of course, the whole school got the weekend off. Friends, relatives, and husband seemed curiously protective about Ethel Kennedy. I came to understand why. Certain things fazed gutsy Ethel, not a whit. Once I plowed with her through the Willowbrook State School for the Mentally Defective on New York's Staten Island. She asked to see the best wards and the worst. A nurse warned that one patient had phobias about hair. Sure enough, the lady flew at Ethel. Wouldn't you think they'd give her a furry dog toy or something to stroke of her own? Ethel said compassionately. There's always a vulnerable innocence about her. She's a funny combination of very mod and old-fashioned, of the puritanical and the open-minded. And she is ferociously candid. Her tongue sometimes gets her into trouble. Apart from her real modesty, perhaps the fear she'll say something awful makes her shy away from interviews and public speeches. Funny Ethel stories abound. Her good friend, columnist Art Buchwald, dining at Hillary Hill, heard her say grace, as usual, then asked if she could recite a Jewish prayer. But who would you pray to? She asked in astonishment. Oh, said Buchwald, the god of corn, the god of rain, etc. The same Victorian Ethel who shies from off-color stories also gave one of the most electric parties I ever went to. It preceded the TV telethon she organized for Washington's Junior Village, a home for orphaned and abandoned children. It was a great mix of pals, old frontiermen, astronauts, Olympic champions like Rayford Johnson, personalities like Alice Roosevelt Longsworth, and the Sprinkleys she invited into appearing, from Perry Como and Carol Channing through the Jefferson Airplane to one of the Smothers Brothers, Tommy. Where else but at Ethel's house could Senator J. William Fulbright be spied deep in earnest conversation with Eddie Fisher? Not everyone is that enchanted by Hickory Hildum, says one pal who swears he's going to cut off his Kennedy entanglements any minute. It's a constant virility race over there. They're all developing. They can't understand you might be independent, Ethel calls up at 5 p.m. saying, "Why not come over for dinner and a movie?" Not thinking you might have babysitter problems. I get so damn sore at her. And then when I see her, it all evaporates. P.S. He was almost the last to leave Ethel's telethon party. One night, RFK came home with a reporter earnestly debating Vietnam. The house was serene. Ethel sat quietly in the library, hanging on husband's every word. Christopher, who was playing with Douglas, politely asked me if I'd mind the babysitter a minute. Politely asked me if I'd mind the baby a minute. "Did you hear that?" asked Ethel, bursting with pride. "That was the great virtue of big families," she said. "Children naturally learn unselfishness, responsibility of big families," she said, "and taking care of one another." Ethel Kennedy grew up as Ethel Skakel in a wealthy Dutch-Irish family of 7. She said her life was more helter-skelter than the Kennedys'.